Welcome back to the Convo Couch, everyone. Pastor Jarduli here. I have a great guest. You can see him over there. He's a fellow Paisan. His name is Garland Favorito. And if you're into election integrity, you probably heard his name before. He's the guy behind the guy in Georgia actually getting a hold of a little audit. We're going to talk about it because now that we've kind of opened up the door and started explaining what real audits are and what fake audits are, or what me and Garland would call fugazi audits, we have to pinpoint when we get them and how we get them and the procedures that go along, because nothing's more important than our elections, ladies and gentlemen. You know how the Convo Couch feels. Garland Favorito, how are you doing, my friend?
Great, Craig. Thanks for having me on. It's great to be on the Convo Couch. And again, I wanted to thank you. I've been on so many podcasts, but as I mentioned before we came on live, this is the first time I've been on a progressive podcast. And it's so wonderful to hear progressives like yourself that are still interested in election integrity, regardless of who actually may or may not benefit from the results. So I'm really grateful to you for having me on.
Well, thank you so much. It does mean a lot to us that we reach across the aisle, and it's important to us because there is a lot of people on the left who have TDS and they've ignored all the elections irregularities or fraud or whatever you want to call it. They're just turning a blind eye to it. And despite math, they're still going along and thinking that it's okay. And to me, I think it's the worst thing that can happen. If we ignore it now, it's going to get way out of control. And it doesn't matter who you support, red, blue, green, gold, whatever. Election integrity to me is a nonpartisan issue. It's about Americans coming together saying one person, one vote, and let's get it right. So why don't you tell people really quick, Garland, a little bit about your history, not without going too deep into it, your organization, but more importantly, finish up this statement with what you've accomplished as far as an audit now in Georgia and what's going on.
Okay, well, that's a lot in one question. So
you have the floor, sir.
Well, let me just start off because what you said there was really important. You never know, if you're not concerned about election integrity, you never know when the situation is going to flip on you. So to give you, Georgia is a classic example. We had a Democrat Secretary of State, Kathy Cox, who brought unverifiable voting in 2002 with those old paperless DREs. I objected to those at that time. I said that they were not verifiable, auditable, or recount capable, and therefore they might be unconstitutional. She ignored us. She brought the machines in anyway. And then the Republicans took control in Georgia, and they maintained those machines. We had Karen Handel and Brian Kemp, who's now the governor, who kept saying that they were going to lead the charge to fix the machines and do something about it. They never did a thing. So I've been fighting with the progressives for 15 years against the Republican establishment until recently.
Yeah,
So it's the whole situation flipped. You know, the Democrats brought the machines in, but now it appears that Republicans were using them to cheat. Yeah. So and there's a significant amount of evidence in that in Georgia over the past 15, 20 years.
And these are DRE machines, right? These are direct response. In other words, there's no paper ballot. You just go up, you press the buttons, and it's a proprietary software machine, and whatever it tells you, you just have to accept.
Right. Now, those were the old machines.
Yes.
So yeah, exactly. That's exactly what when we operated on those statewide for something like 18 years.
Jeez.
And then the court finally declared them unconstitutional and banned them. There was another case. We took our case to the Georgia Supreme Court, and they blew us off. But another group, Coalition of Good Governance, took a case called Curling v. Raffensperger into federal court. They won their case, had some great attorney support and a lot of pro bono work that was done there. And they actually won, and those old systems were banned in Georgia. And they were, in fact, what I said 17 years earlier was in fact correct. They were unverifiable, and therefore they were unconstitutional. So that then the legislature went on to buy the new machines. Along those lines, back then we formed what's called Voter GA, which is Voters Organized for Trusted Election Results in Georgia. That's a 15-year nonpartisan organization, all volunteer, 501c3. When the interesting thing, Craig, about this was that they legalized inauditable voting in both cases. So in 2002, the legislature had to legalize this kind of voting because at that point in time, every voting machine was required to have an independent audit trail of each vote cast.
Okay.
They had to remove that law in order to buy those corrupt machines back in 2002. And then in 2019, they turned around and did the same thing. And they allowed this barcode voting. So where you actually accumulate votes that are in the QR code and not what the voters saw. And that was what we also had tried to outlaw. We almost did outlaw it the year before with the previous bill. But this year that bill passed. And the same in this case were the Republicans who voted for the amendment that would have outlawed the unverifiable voting turned around and voted against the same amendment the following year. So we ended up with these voting machines that accumulate votes out of QR codes that you as a voter never could verify. So that's sort of the nutshell of 17 years of history in Georgia and what went down here. And we've been fighting these ever since. And ironically, it was the Republicans who passed this bill, which was one of the worst bills in Georgia history. And then suddenly found out, well, this was, it appeared that maybe Donald Trump got cheated this time. And that caused a whole stir. And all of a sudden now, all the Trump people are election integrity advocates. They were, we had before worked mostly with progressives and grassroots conservatives who thought they were cheated by the Republican establishment, as well as libertarians. Now it's kind of flipped a little bit, and we being nonpartisan are now on this particular case that involves Donald Trump here, and not really just Donald Trump, but the elections in general, because we've got to save this election process, as you mentioned at the top of the show.
Yeah.
So we filed a case after the November 3rd election. I can take up from there and go from there. Is that okay?
Well, yeah, I just want to say really quickly, just to point out, I think what you just said right there is so amazing, that you used to work with progressives. And I tell people this all the time, that this isn't about Joe Biden or Donald Trump. When I'm fighting for election integrity, I'm fighting for the grassroots candidates who've been getting screwed over in the system for so long. It just so happens that I think that's something else that we have to point out too, Garland, because I think it's just a two-party illusion in my mind when it comes to the establishment. I don't think there's any way the Democrats could have pulled this off without the help of the Republicans turning a blind eye and just ignoring what happened. So I see two parts of the two parties working together. And as far as that vote that Georgians had, be careful what you wish for, because it came back and it bit them right in the ass. But please continue on from what's going on right now, because it's so interesting and so intriguing. I can't wait to get into it. So please go ahead.
No, you're absolutely right. And that's exactly what happened, Craig. In Georgia, the Republicans turned a blind eye for the most part. Yeah. Some actually tried to find out what was happening. But the leadership turned a blind eye, primarily because the leadership was involved in this corrupted mess to begin with. Brian Kemp was the governor now, was the former Secretary of State. So he turned a blind eye. Ravensburger is turning 1,000 blind eyes to this whole thing. And Jeff Duncan, who is the lieutenant governor, is also turning a blind eye because he was elected in two of the most controversial elections in Georgia history in 2018. Nobody expected him to be lieutenant governor. So that's a whole nother story. But to go in, so what happened on November 3rd, when they passed this bill, they required one race to be audited every 2 years, one single race, a statewide or federal race. No other races could need to be audited. No local races for the Senate, no local races for the House, no judicial races, no municipal races, any nonpartisan races. Nothing had to be audited, just one race for every 2 years. And that came up, and the Secretary of State picked the presidential race to audit because he was under tremendous pressure to audit that race. And so we audited that race. And in Fulton County, where I live, Fulton being the largest, most populous county in Georgia, we audited the race, and we found that the counterfeit ballots. So we had these 4 different senior poll managers who were doing the audit, and they were handling the ballots, and they said, these are counterfeit. These are not real ballots. Yeah. They and the reason they said that was because they were mail-in ballots, but they weren't folded from being mailed, and they weren't marked with a writing instrument. They looked like they were machine marked with toner, and the paper stock didn't look right. Yeah. So for those,
what exactly did they find this?
When they were auditing the results, so we had to do a hand count audit.
Yeah, that was that December, or was that January? Or
that was actually in November. November 14th and 15th was when the
okay, this is the first. All right, okay.
Yeah, well, and immediately as soon as they found this, they filled out sworn affidavits for what they did, and they took it over to some attorneys who were working with Lynn Wood. Well, Lynn Wood didn't do anything with it, so they just sat there for a month or two. I was trying to get different conservative organizations involved in trying to, file a lawsuit. Nobody seemed to be interested. We thought the evidence was unbelievably clear.
Yeah.
So we ended up filing the lawsuit. We being it was 9 of us at the time. Just plain old citizens. And we filed the lawsuit, and we said, we want to see the ballots. We believe that these are equal protection and due process violations of our constitutional rights because the votes were diluted by counterfeit votes. So show us the ballots was been our theme. And then we can find out who won. And if in fact Joe Biden did win, then everybody will know Joe won. And if not, then we'll know if how many ballots were invalid or counterfeit, and then we'll know subtract those from the totals, and we'll figure out who actually won this race, and everybody can know the truth, whatever the truth is.
Yeah,
which we still don't know right now what the truth is.
But okay. About how many ballots did these seniors find at that moment when they were counting? Was it just a handful? Was it a lot of them? I think a lot of people who paid close attention, and this is where Jovan Hutton Pulitzer came into play when he says, "Oh, I can find these kinesthetic marks." And I mean, you're an election integrity activist, and I've been doing this for about 5 years. You've been doing it for much more. But this guy came on the spot out of nowhere and was like, "Hey, man, take a look at this. I can find these things with kinesthetic marks and these ballots that have been machine marked." About how many of them did we find at that time?
Well, according to the sworn affidavits, they believe that the number would scale if we were allowed to look at them all. Okay. That number would scale into the tens of thousands.
Okay, so it was something serious.
Yeah, definitely serious. It wasn't just like a handful, and there's no other logical explanation for these ballots to exist.
Yeah. Okay, well, what about the audits that took place? I was talking to a lot of people in Georgia, and they told me about this Arlo system, which also counts the ballots. But here's the thing: they sold it, Garland, for guys like me who, like, when people ask me, like, what's your number one issue with elections? I said, well, for me, it's the proprietary software within our tabulation machines. I'd throw it out right away. Me personally, I'd have an open source system with blockchain, and then a hand counted audit in the same place the vote is casted. That's me, what I want to do. But a lot of people talk about, oh, the proprietary software, it's black box voting. I know you know all the stuff, but they said this Arlo system and this audit in Georgia was clean because it actually used an open source system. But for when all the activists kind of explained to me how they were doing it, it wasn't a clean system. Can you go a little bit into the audits that already took place in Georgia?
I am so glad you asked that question. So the audit, the fact that a hand count audit was done on the presidential race was a good thing. The concept was good. The execution was totally corrupted. So in 3 or 4 different ways. So I'll give you the 3 biggest ways.
Okay.
First of all, when they did the audit, they didn't have a Republican and a Democrat sitting at each table. So it's supposed to be a member of the opposing parties to check on each other or the opposing candidate campaigns. They didn't do that. They had Democrats at one table, Republicans at another table.
Huh.
Then the second problem was when they went to upload the data, they didn't have anybody monitoring the upload point in most counties. So they could enter whatever data they wanted to and upload it into the Arlo system. Nobody would know.
Got it.
But here's the kicker. That if you think that's bad, here's the worst thing. The worst thing was that the Secretary of State ordered them to put it into the Arlo system, as you said, and that was his system. So the counties did not have any results of their own audit. The chain of custody was totally broken. They put the data into the Secretary of State system and had to ask the Secretary of State what are the results of their own audit.
Jeez.
So the Secretary of State could have made up any results that he wanted to and fed them back into the counties. So it was a completely corrupted audit. And the Carter Center, which was retained by the Secretary of State's office, produced this glowing report of how wonderful the Secretary of State handled it, when in reality, it was probably the most corrupted audit that's ever been conducted in the history of elections. So that was the Carter Center on record supporting the Secretary of State.
That stinks too, because I mean, the Carter Center, how far we have fallen, how hard we have fallen, because it used to be so solid. In fact, I remember we were talking about in 2014 when James Baker and Jimmy Carter got together and they had a bipartisan commission, and they even exposed and told the public, hey, listen, when it comes to the mail-in ballots, that's the place that's most susceptible to fraud. I would say that and the proprietary software. But now what you're explaining in these audit situations, it's just ridiculous. Did they authenticate any of the ballots in this audit at all? Or was it just a recount and pass it on? Because you had mentioned that we had seen some situations where ballots were unfolded. It looked like a computer mark. Did they even bring that into factor into this audit at all and say, let's authenticate these ballots?
Well, no, not at all. And that was another flaw that that was not even the top 3 that I just mentioned. But that was very important because when the counterfeit ballots were identified, there was no procedure for how to handle a counterfeit ballot. If you found one in the middle of an audit, what are you going to do? Well, so they just kept going. The auditor showed it to the audit monitors. We all looked at it. The Fulton County officials came over and said, well, you got to get back away. The audit monitors have to be 6 feet from the table. You can't talk to the auditors. You can't do anything like this, even regardless of whether you found, fraudulent ballots or not. So nothing got done in that regard. And they just kept on counting the counterfeit ballots as though nothing happened. And then when the president ordered a recount or requested a recount, they just rescanned the previous unverifiable results and recounted the previous counterfeit ballots. It's one of the craziest things that you could ever imagine, and it actually happened.
Who's the contractor for the absentee ballots in Fulton County where you're at? I know here we use K&H, which is in Washington, even though we're in LA, and there's a lot of funny things about these companies. Who makes the ballots for you guys over there in Fulton County?
Another strange thing that happened, but you're all over this. So
Oh yeah.
for some reason, the Secretary of State decided to make a contract with Runback out of Arizona. So Runback did most of the ballots for this election, the November election. But what they did was they couldn't do them all because there was so much lead time. So Fulton County had to have another contractor who produced the ballots, some ballots in the last 2 weeks. So probably maybe, I think they said like about maybe 20% were done locally here in Georgia, but the vast majority, 80%, came from Runback out of Arizona.
Yep. I think a lot of people don't understand the whole chain of custody of, in other words, this year it was crazy. Everybody who read the Time Life magazine article can see how what they said they saved democracy. I think what they did right there is they admitted to treason. But a lot of people don't understand that when you blast out all the ballots to everybody on a voter roll, and the voter rolls are, unfortunately, they're dirty. They're not updated properly. There's a lot of people who move. Anybody who moves doesn't call their election official where they used to live and say, hey, take me off the voter roll. It doesn't happen that way. But nobody talks about the chain of custody, that if Runback put out all these ballots, sent them out, and then some of them came back to them because they didn't hit the place, what happens with those ballots? Do they burn them? Do they shred them? Or do they hand them off to a nefarious character that, where you have all these drop boxes out in the middle of nowhere that could just put them in the ballot box? And in some states like ours, where ballot harvesting is illegal, I could just walk 1,000 of them in. So a lot of people don't even talk about this here, and they don't understand the concept of how many ballots could have got out there this time. So,
well, yeah, so that's a great point. So now Georgia actually had pretty good mail-in ballot procedures. For example, now they didn't send out ballots to all voters. They only sent out ballot applications. So I think in some state, I forgot where it was. I don't know if it was New Jersey, Pennsylvania, maybe, I can't remember. They sent out live ballots. Maybe I think it was Nevada as well.
yep.
But Georgia doesn't do that. They just send out the application. They send out
Okay.
the application to everybody. So okay, that's okay. I can go live with that. And then we have pretty good verification techniques when we get these ballots back. We had a signature verification process that was pretty tight, but that got loosened tremendously in the November election. So 90% of the signatures that were being rejected were then accepted as votes for this particular election. And we didn't have drop boxes before the election, so we didn't have the issue of ballot harvesting. And if you took your ballot to the county, you could only take your own ballot. You couldn't take anybody else's ballot.
So you guys have halfway decent laws in there in Georgia as far as securing that. Okay.
For mail-in, but now that all changed though, and it ended up exactly like you were saying. For the November election, everything that we had that I thought was good was thrown out the window. And then we ended up with the signature matching was reduced to where 90% of the ballots were accepted by Fulton County that we were rejected before. We had these drop boxes that were put out disproportionately.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I'm a constitutionalist. So whatever you do, you got to do equal for all people.
Exactly. I talk about this all the time, Garland. I said it's unconstitutional. Mark Zuckerberg did this in Pennsylvania. He did this in Wisconsin, in the Democratic area, a drop box every 2 square miles. But in the Republican area, it's like, where's Waldo? Go on a weekend vacation to try and find a drop box. That is unconstitutional. I am so glad you brought that up. I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, if any existed at all.
Oh.
So it was completely disproportional, and the money that came in as well to do was also disproportional. And some of these things have been corrected in our new bill that got passed, so it won't be as bad as it was. But it was just a farce of an election. And I just, I'm so glad that you see it. And your listeners, I think, we're seeing it. But right now, it's not that many progressives are understanding how bad this election was, and they're focused on who won and who lost,
Yeah.
not on what it's going to do to them in the future.
Yeah. And they don't realize what it did to them in the past. Like I said,
Right.
unfortunately, I supported Tulsi in 2020. Uh, and I still had I still had some love for Bernie Sanders. I was upset that he didn't challenge it in 2016. And then he didn't challenge it in 2020. And a lot of the same
Right.
tactics that they used on Donald Trump, they had already perfected using it on Bernie Sanders. We
Yes.
suspected that a lot of fugaziness went through the mail-in situation because Joe Biden's numbers in California just didn't add up. He was polling at 8%. He got to 26%. And Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg dropped out the day before Super Tuesday, which made it impossible to change those mail-in ballots where 85% of them were already in. You know what I'm saying? So we suspected it was either changing something in the back of the house, stuffing the ballots with clustering with mail-in ballots. Talk to us now about what you're doing now as far as the ballot images, because this is a Brakey method. This is what I call Brakey. John Roberts Brakey. I talk about him all the time. He's a friend of ours. I called him the audit guy, and he's all about ballot images. And in fact, the other day when he was on Steve Bannon, my friend from the EIPCA, Ellen Swenson, called me. He's like, your audit guy was just on Steve Bannon. He was just on. I'm like, yeah, that's our guy. But now I know that you're also a ballot image guy. I think you're trying to get a hold of the real ballots, but you've got a hold of some ballot images, your organization. Can you explain to us how you got a hold of them and what you could find using this method?
Absolutely, absolutely. And John Brakey and I are really good friends as well. He's doing great work out there. I talk to him fairly often, and he's really one of the ones that got me hooked on ballot transparency and the ballot images. So we're winning cases in Georgia on ballot images like crazy, and we are also have gotten the legislation to now where ballot images will be publicly available statewide. We got that passed in this new bill in
the new Georgia bill.
Yeah.
We didn't even mention that when we talked about that bill that everybody was lying about, and they were moving the All-Star game on you guys out of Atlanta. Just disgusting. And when they say that Jackie Robinson would be proud, I said, no, Jackie Robinson would tell you this is BS, and how dare you compare this to Jim Crow. But I didn't even know that they added that in that bill, and that's something big. So please continue.
Well, right. And the Concerned Black Clergy came out against both Stacey Abrams and Joe Biden for lying about that bill. They ran a full-page ad in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about that.
You got to send that to me. I'm going to put that up.
Okay, yeah, it's a great ad. I will. It's so big. I don't know if I can scan it. It's like a full page of the newspaper. So
gotcha.
They really laid it out on them pretty good. But so going back to our lawsuit, we asked for four things. We asked for a visual inspection of the ballots. We asked for a rescan and a forensic inspection of the ballots. We asked for the ballot images, and we asked for the standard Dominion election reports that Fulton County used to run the election. The judge gave us conditional approval after he heard the evidence, and the county really had no excuses. The judge gave us conditional approval to get the ballots. And he said, but we have some conditions here. We want to make sure that that you have a good plan. We want to know who the people are. And he had a couple of other, things that I think were good. They were good things to ask for. We had already been working on our plan for 2 months. In fact, we actually even sent it to Arizona. So we were ready for that. It was we submitted that. We submitted all of our people who were going to do the inspection. They are poll managers, audit monitors, and all that. So we went back and we took that into court and we said, here it is. And even the opposing counsels couldn't object much. They were having trouble finding anything to object to because we had worked ahead of time to try to resolve all of their concerns. But at that time, the Secretary of State and the Attorney General of Georgia entered. Well, they wanted to enter into the case. They just did an amicus brief to say no, you can't give them the ballots. That's all kinds of security and privacy issues. Well, they were all lies. Almost everything that was in the brief is a lie. And we've got all that documented. We did an immediate response to their brief, but it slowed down the process a little bit. I think the judge can see through it. So he gave them a little bit of deference at our last hearing, and he decided, since everyone agreed that we should have ballot images, he decided that we'll start there. I'll give you the ballot images. So he ordered Fulton County to turn over the ballot images, and we're going back to court this month for more. But we are right now looking at the ballot images and trying to see what we can see out of those. Now, the problem is they're only 200 DPI and they're black and white, 1-bit color. So we can't see much. What we really need and what the experts say they need is 600 DPI with grayscale. And that.
So they gave you low resolution and black and white. You really can't see the kinesthetic marks if they're there.
Right. No, you can't.
Limited.
It's too primitive. You can see some things. There's some things that are interesting, but they're too primitive to be able to prove conclusively whether or not the ballots are counterfeit.
Can you look at signatures? Can you verify the names to the poll books? I mean, what can you get out of these images right now, Garland?
So ballots don't have any voter information on them.
Okay.
Signature matching is outside of the scope of our lawsuit. There is another lawsuit. There are actually 2 more lawsuits that are still alive in Georgia that people don't really know about. One is the U.S. Senate challenge, and that signature matching could be within the scope of that lawsuit.
Ossoff or Warnock?
It actually covers both.
Both, okay.
Yeah, so that's still alive, and it could get into signature matching. But the primary emphasis of that lawsuit is the questionable Dominion machines and the credibility of those machines, okay, and how they cast doubt on the results.
Okay. Well, let me ask another question. So basically, when it comes to right now, what you got all the ballot images from Fulton, but you have it at 200 instead of 600. In other words, you have it at low resolution, which is really hard to see things, instead of a higher resolution where you can really see things. So right. What specifically are you looking for with the ballot images then now at this point?
Well, the first thing we want to do is count them and see, do we actually have an image for every
vote casted and counted?
Yeah, exactly. That's the first thing we like to do, and we should be able to do that pretty easily. And then we're just going to have to look at these and see what they can see. Some of them appear to be obvious enough, even at 200 DPI, to see whether or not they're counterfeit. But there's probably, I don't think we can make any kind of conclusive calls on that, given the resolution that we have to work with.
Okay. So let's talk about something else, since we're talking about the ballot images and stuff. And that's what you said you're going to do. You're going to count them first to match them up, because we have this proprietary software in our machines. And this is the word that these 2 words I think are not used enough. I hear people get caught up on Dominion or Smartmatic or ES&S, but they all have the same proprietary software that, in other words, we can't look. It's called black box voting. I think our audience has heard this so many times. Shouldn't that be the first thing that we do away with, is get rid of this proprietary software and go to an open source system?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's one of the things we should do. Is it should be proprietary, open. The other thing that we have asked for here in Georgia, and we haven't got yet, is public availability of server images. So if you wanted to conduct a forensic exam on your county server, you should be able to get an image of it very easily and do that. So people don't realize how easy that is to do. All you have to do is take a sealed media device to your county elections director, let the county elections director put it into the county server and do an image copy of what's on that server. It takes about a half an hour. The director can be doing something else during that time. You can pull that out, wrap it up, serve it and seal it and give it back to whoever the person who requested it, and they can take it for forensics. And you got your chain of custody on there and everything.
Yeah.
So
I was
easy,
gonna
so
say,
easy.
didn't you guys have a problem with your server in 2017? Isn't it kind of like, I believe Georgia's system is a little bit half-assed backwards, where instead of reporting to the county, you report to the Secretary of State server, and then it goes to the county or something? I mean, remember you talking about.
Well, I know what you're talking about. I think you're talking about election preparation. So as you said, normally results in election are reported from the bottom up,
Yeah,
from the counties to the state.
exactly.
However, but in Georgia, Georgia is the only state that preps their machines from the top down. So what you have this single system that's open to a single point of attack. And if you can compromise that central server, then you can download your malware to every county in every election, and then propagates to every voting machine, and you can control every voting machine in every county for every election. And that's what happened in 2017. We found that there's big exposure at Kennesaw State University, which they had contracted with to do where the Center for Election Systems for the Secretary of State's office operates. And they had this huge exposure. They found out that the system was wide open, exposed to the internet. It's a Drupal flaw. And we found out later that it not only was exposed for just 6 months, which is what they thought, but it had actually been exposed for probably well over 10 years. And it was wide open ever since the day it was created. So it's just incredible flaw. But yeah, Georgia is unique in that regard with the top down election preparation.
I don't think people realize, the everyday average person realizes how many vulnerabilities there are within our election system. I think a lot of us sometimes argue about where the troublemaking has come from. I have some friends who will never shut up about Russia, and I like to smack them on the back of the head and say, this is coming from within arm's length. I'm sick and tired of blaming other countries. This is with our own system. Let's clean our own house to make sure we get this shit straight.
That's such a good point. Yeah. I just to add Please. To that point. So the domestic, I'm absolutely convinced that anytime an election is thrown in America, it's domestic. It's not coming from foreign interference. It is people working behind the scenes domestically for the vast majority of the cases. So I totally agree with that. And the Russian thing, I mean, okay, yeah, they manipulated some social media and that kind of thing, but we never really had any evidence that they changed election results. They did access a couple of voter registration databases in a couple of states, but they didn't really change results. So that was, of course, blown way out of proportion. For what actually happened.
And I think the voter registrations that were penetrated, one was in Alaska, I believe, and stuff like that. It wasn't even like proof that it came from the Kremlin or not. It could have been an individual actor outside the country as well. And I'm glad you said that, because I say this stuff all the time. And I'm like, stop looking at Russia and China. Let's look within ourselves. Our system is set up so our elites, or whatever you want to call them, or the people pulling the strings, can do what they want.
If I was a progressive, I'd be much more worried about Karl Rove than I would be about Vladimir Putin.
Me too. I am. So really quickly, we're going to get this wrapped up, but I want to talk about, you said that we saw significant evidence that there could have been fraud in the 2020 general election. I talk about it all the time. I want you to elaborate on that. I know you kind of already pointed it out with the ballots and stuff, but one of the things that really told me stuff, not only really just made me open my eyes, is I look at voting pattern analysis, right? Do you ever look at these things, Garland, and say, okay, the voting analysis right here, there's a spike, it's got to be explained, there's an anomaly, something's wrong here? What are your thoughts about looking at voting pattern analysis?
Well, that's how I got into this thing in November. I was an observer in the tabulation center, and also in the State Farm Arena, which is where you saw the video. And I noticed there was this huge vote spike of about 20,000 votes for Joe Biden, and President Trump's totals at that time appeared to have gone down. So it didn't look right to me. So that's actually what triggered me. And then we found out that right after these ballots were scanned in the State Farm Arena that appeared to be scanned illegally, there was this huge vote spike on the election feed where Joe Biden picked up about 100,000 vote margin from it went from he added about 136,000 votes, and Donald Trump added about 29,000 in this push right after these ballots were scanned.
Yeah.
So that's what triggered me to get into this originally, was looking at the actual analysis of the vote patterns and that were we call them the interim feeds.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that Phil Evans' work, I believe, is one of the guys that does some of the great work. I know Dr. Shiva has kind of picked that up and has worked with Benny Smith and that stuff. But is there any way we can be directed to people to look at these spikes and these voter analysis? Is there an expert we can lean on for this?
Well, what we've done, we did this real time when it happened. So we have some analysis of the election feeds that are in our testimony. Up on voterga.org events, you can go to my testimony and David Cross testimony, and we go into this. I think David testified, I believe, on the December 30th, right near about halfway through. And so he's got some good graphs that show specifically what happened in Fulton and what happened in Georgia right at the time that it happened. So it wasn't an after the fact analysis. This was done right, within a few days of the results.
I think when it comes to Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, those three states, Wisconsin, the fourth one, we see these crazy spikes. And I try to explain to somebody, for Joe Biden to get that many votes and catch Donald Trump, it's more likely that you get struck by lightning 4 times in your lifetime. But if you want to believe that, okay, that's on you. But we should be looking into these things. And I just tip my hat off to the work you're doing, Garland. It's been such a treat to talk to you today. Can you just tell us the next step of what you're doing in your work, what to look for, and maybe promise that you'll come back and talk to us again and let us know progress?
I'm happy to come on anytime, Pastor. That's great. But
thank you.
I will. Our next step is to go back to court on May the 21st. And we'll be back in court. But in the meantime, we're analyzing these images to see if there's anything that we can find in them that in one way or the other that would help.
Yeah.
But May 21st is our next court date.
Yeah. So you're hoping that maybe we find something that can trigger a deeper audit to get a hold of those ballots itself and to show the ones maybe that we once saw that were no folds, computer marks in them.
Yes, we still will. We're going to have to get a hold of the actual ballots, just like they did in Arizona.
Yeah. Do you think you guys could get a chance for an Arizona type of audit? Is that the goal here?
Yes, it will be. It's on a smaller scale because they have 2 million ballots. We only really want to look at 147,000 because we think that will make the difference. The election here was only less than 12,000 difference.
Oh yeah.
So right, if we can get a hold of those, we'll do a smaller scale. We call it an inspection, And, we'll be able to explain, here's what the truth is. We'll present that in court. And then once we present it in court, it'll become public knowledge. So that's what we're looking to do, and to get to the bottom of what actually happened so we all know the truth.
Well, Garland, I can't thank you enough for the work you're doing. I hope that the Convo Couch and channels like us can make you proud, because it's not a sexy topic, election integrity, and a lot of younger people just don't want to get into it. They want to get into a Green New Deal or Medicare for all or ending the wars. But I explained to them, hey, if we don't have election integrity, then you don't have anything, because without this issue being held, we'll never get the representative government we want. And I'm glad there's guys like you out there, Paisan, who are fighting for the good fight.
Well, thank you. And you've already made us proud, just for having me on. We really appreciate you carrying this fight. You're in a very difficult situation because you've got to, a lot of the progressives just don't understand the value of what you just said. But hopefully it will sink in. And we are having the same situation with the conservatives back years ago. They would not understand the value of election integrity. But I think that we're all going to slowly come around, and if you keep up the great work you're doing, we'll get there.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. That's Garland Favorito, my Paisan, hanging out in Georgia, holding it down. Election integrity. Got a hold of some ballot images. Maybe we can crack it open, get a little bit more. He's looking to get a hold maybe of 150,000 ballots, if that, for an inspection, so we can see what's what. Thank you, Garland Favorito. You have a great day today, a great week. Good luck in court, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Craig.